Tracie Crenshaw will bring us her message. Tracie.
Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tracie Crenshaw. I have been coming to Buff for over 3 years now. I found Buff 4 months after I moved here from Austin, Texas, and it's been an important part of my life since I first walked in the doors. I grew up in the Detroit area, and I've also spent a few years in the Lansing area. For leisure, I've spent a lot of time researching and learning about 2 areas that we have the least knowledge about: the universe, particularly at the quantum level, and the brain. Coincidentally, the 2 systems are said to have an uncanny resemblance to each other, but that's not why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about our brains and our minds. Here we are in 2021, and we are more anxious, more depressed, more helpless, more empty, and more nervous than ever before. We can pinpoint a number of reasons why. There's a worldwide pandemic. There's been turbulent unrest in the country. Our families are divided by both politics and physically in quarantine. People are dying by the thousands each day. The climate is changing. The world is burning. But mental health took a long nosedive long before those current issues fully emerged. Let's talk about the brain for a moment. The brain is composed of complex circuits uniquely designed to put pieces together and solve mysteries. If we look at depression, we can see that depression rates continue to rise, with about 300 million people suffering from it. As we try to solve the mystery of depression rates, we can look for clues in the area of neurochemistry. Our brains are swimming in neurochemicals that have a cosmic impact on our moods, emotions, and thoughts. It would seem to make sense to take a pill to alter that neurochemistry to treat depression. But it's hard to mimic nature, and it's not precise. It doesn't help everyone who has depression. So what's important to the brain? We might first say that thinking is important to the brain. It's the function it does most. However, the brain is more importantly designed by evolution to move our bodies around. The cerebellum contains 80% of our brain's neurons. It is most noted for its role in controlling our motor coordination. And then there's the motor cortex, which is involved in specific muscles we want to move. In the motor cortex, the area that controls the hand is disproportionately large. Our brains seem to think that movement with our hands is incredibly important. Over the past century and generations before, our lifestyle has changed in regards to movement. We used to shell peas, shuck corn, can vegetables, and food for winter. We were a busy species. Life was harder. We rarely had time for leisure activities. When the television was invented, people thought it was neat, but also thought it'll never get bigger than the radio because who has time to sit and watch television? As we created machines and technology to make our lives easier, what was our ultimate trade? Now, hardly anyone hand washes their clothing. We have washing machines. We have dishwashers to clean our dishes. We have commercially made clothing and frozen dinners, fast food, smart furnaces, coffee pots, ovens, tractors. We work hard to pay people to do things that our ancestors used to do ourselves. A large number of us modern humans possibly have too much time on our hands, and we tend to fill that time with Netflix, Hulu, mindlessly scrolling through social media, video games, texting. These activities tend to numb our worries, our fears, our insecurities, and boredom. They provide an escape that our ancestors never experienced, an escape from processing our emotions. What if our ancestors' dependence on their hands to do work for survival also provided them with a level of fulfillment that we do not have in modern times? There are studies showing that there is a correlation between having accomplishment with work done with our hands and mental health. In addition, this wonderful world of technological advances means we don't have to wait very long for things anymore. Remember when we had to wait a whole week to watch the next episode of our favorite show? Now binge watching is a common and an actually socially acceptable practice. We don't have to work all day to prepare a dinner for our families. We can pop a tray of food in the microwave and ding, dinner. We have Instapots and other people who can prepare our food for us. We don't have to put in the work to go find a mate anymore. We have online dating sites like Tinder. So it seems we are in the age of instant gratification, and that has rewired our brains to be more anxious and less patient and less fulfilled, because when we essentially have anything we want at our fingertips, from Amazon next day delivery to already made cake on every corner to instant online communication with our son in Belgium, they no longer feel like rewards, but what we are entitled to. We do not have to work very hard for them, and we have no sense of accomplishment from them. So I imagine as time goes on, our neural pathways will continue to change and affect our mental health in more cataclysmic ways. But the good news is we can change our neurochemistry strategically by engaging in smart behaviors. Hundreds of doctors used to prescribe knitting to women who were distraught with anxiety because it seemed to calm their nerves. Now we know that serotonin is increased when we are involved with repetitive behavior. So on top of the repetitive behavior of it, note that knitting requires the use of both hands. Looking forward to the finished knitted hat, your dopamine is increased as you're looking for that sense of accomplishment and the reward for finishing the hat. You also see a decrease of the stress hormones such as cortisol, responsible for much of mental health issues. So this is where neuroplasticity comes into play. When we engage in these other behaviors and activities, not just on a regular basis, but also in response to any level of crisis, we are creating effective coping. The brain is a very flexible system. Neuroplasticity is essentially about rewiring and repaving neural pathways. When we learn a new skill and repeat it over and over until it's more permanently ingrained in our brains, that's because of neuroplasticity. It's the ability of networks in the brain to change through reorganization and growth. We tend to think of neuroplasticity as just about learning a new ability, but it also includes environmental influences. And what I find interesting in light of our current conditions, psychological stress. We're finding that stress is much more damaging to the brain than ever thought of before. We've known that stress increases blood pressure, but now we know that long-term stress actually changes the brain structure. Soma, or neuron cells, make up gray matter in our brains and is highly important for cognitive function, higher learning, attention. When stress essentially does is increase white matter in the brain. This happens because excess cortisol, a stress hormone, creates excess myelin, which is the fatty material that covers some axons. White matter allows neurons to connect to each other, which is good, but an excess of white matter allows less room for higher functions, which means there are increased cases of depression, panic disorder, and cognitive decline. And knowing this, we can view stress management and cognitive behavioral therapy as important tools to get through crises. In fact, studies have shown that stress management, including meditation and CBT, have increased gray matter in brains. So it's 2021. And we feel like we have no control. We can't control that a large portion of the country isn't wearing masks and is not doing their part in containing the virus. We can't control that there are people out there who don't even believe the virus is real, or if they do, don't think it's very serious. We can't control our very governments who aren't doing their due diligence to protect us. So we get angry. We might obsessively troll those on social media who think we're a part of the who think they are part of the we think are part of the problem. We hone in on COVID numbers, bringing ourselves a new sense of terror and dread. We spend our waking and even bedtime hours just reading the news, distancing ourselves from our families and friends. We know that these aren't helpful behaviors, but we can't seem to stop. What if we adopt a different perspective about worry? Worrying is just wasted energy. We worry and we feel helpless over what we cannot control. The more helpless we feel, the more anxious and depressed we get. So we get caught up in this vicious cycle of negative thinking, which makes us feel bad and physically strained, and then back to negative thinking, which isn't productive in a pandemic or any other crisis that we find ourselves in. And when we're afraid, we avoid. The more you avoid, the more you enforce fear. We can take being 6 feet apart or avoiding people altogether. Those of us who take the virus seriously are taking social distancing seriously. Months ago, we paved new neural pathways to our brains as a response to the pandemic. A lot of us now have a fear response if someone is near us without a mask. Our brains have been rewired to avoid as a method of survival. We obviously have to avoid certain behavior in a pandemic or in any other situations that are risky. There's also what's recommended, and then there's bordering on obsession. But Tracie, you say this is a pandemic. It's better to be over-prepared and over-careful than to take any risk of catching a deadly virus. So yes, you are right. I'm not referring specifically to these behaviors. I firmly believe there's no harm in making it habits to disinfect gas nozzles before touching them, wiping off delivered packages before they come to your house. There's nothing wrong with the people who aren't comfortable seeing anyone else at all and isolating in their home, as well as nothing wrong with those who want social interaction and go for walks with friends outside wearing masks. The avoidance I'm referring to is avoiding our thoughts and feelings. We are uncertain and we do not like uncertainty. But if we can tune into what we feel and process it, we can take steps toward managing our suffering. One way to start rewiring the brain back via neuroplasticity, or if you prefer, neurohacking, is by reframing negative thoughts. Let's talk about negative thoughts. There is a lot of talk nowadays about not encouraging friends and family to avoid negative thoughts, that pretending everything is sunshine and happiness to make everyone around you comfortable isn't healthy. I agree, it is not healthy. We humans are programmed to think negatively. From an evolution standpoint, it's helped us survive. We haven't gotten this far in life by seeing a bear heading our way and thinking, gee, what a cute looking bear. How wonderful that he could move toward me so fast. He must want a big old bear hug. Rather, we sense a true threat, a danger, and we automatically think we better get out of there fast. So we are programmed to think negatively as a result of thousands of years of having to survive in nature. We were prey. We were hunted as well as hunters. Our brains are so deeply programmed in fight or flight responses that in 2021, that mechanism is triggered by getting cut off on the highway, or a friend not responding to text messages, or your husband purposely leaving clothes on the floor next to the hamper. We are programmed to jump to the worst case scenarios because it was the worst case scenarios that humans and humanoids faced for thousands of years. Danger was everywhere. And although most of those threats no longer exist for us, it is still our nature to think negatively. While we should never invalidate the negative thoughts and feelings of ourselves and our loved ones, what if we started viewing negative thoughts for what they are in this day and age? A virus. Negative thoughts can be a virus. We have 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day. 90% of them are the same as yesterday. These negative thoughts create the same negative emotions as you had the day before and the day before. It is very important that we are aware of our thoughts because these negative thoughts program our brains to believe in untrue notions. So reframing negative thoughts is a way to start paving new neural pathways. Let's look at a negative thought that I often have. I'm never going to feel better. This one likes to pop up when I have a chronic flare-up. I think a lot of us can relate with the I'm never thought pattern. I'm never going to get rid of this cold. I'm never going to get through this pile of laundry. I'm never going to be able to finish this project. But they're simply not true thoughts. They are false statements that our brain believes when we're constantly repeating these things to ourselves. How we can handle these negative thoughts are first by acknowledging them, because we do need to validate our own selves and thoughts, even if they aren't true, and then reframing it. I'm never going to feel better again turns into, I felt bad before and it always gets better. There are things I can do to feel better faster. Then we are empowered and not feeling helpless about a situation that exists out of our control. How about COVID-19 is on the rise and nothing seems to be done about it? I'm never going to have a normal life again. How many of us think that? I am never going to have the sense of normalcy I used to have. How can we reframe that? Maybe we could say, life does feel different without having an office to go into, without hugging my friends, without going to class in person. But life was different before I had a job, before I had those friends, and before I was in college. Life is always changing. So how do I adapt to these changes in front of me? There are things that I can do that will still make me feel fulfilled in my job, socially, and in school. Plastered all over social media are people saying this year is already bad. 2020 was bad. The year before was bad. People consistently agree that the year sucks and subsequently think that their lives are terrible. We tend to focus only on one thing, usually something negative. We don't look at the big picture. And there are far more positive things occurring than one negative thing that has become the focal point of our attentions. One way we can halt the constant scanning for threats is by big picture thinking. So I did this activity last night, and I encourage you to do it at home. So what I did is I started with a blank piece of paper, and in the top corner, I drew a box with, and I wrote COVID-19 in it. This sheet is my attention, my focus, my perspective. This box indicates that I'm only focused on this crisis and not paying attention to all of this, the big picture. What you can do, what I did, is take a pen and start writing all the other things in life that and the space in the rest of the page. Things you can focus on. So we see we're not ignoring the pandemic. We acknowledge that it's there, but so is how important family time is. Photography, snuggling pets, remodeling a bathroom, close connections with people, sledding after a snowfall, etc. You can put down anything that gives you joy, whether it's ice cream or making hummus from scratch. There are no rules. They don't even have to be positive. It's just an activity to show how much more there is to our lives than the crises that we focus on. So here's a word that I learned at Mayo Clinic when I was there for about a month, catastrophizing. What does that look like? It's making a catastrophe out of a situation, whether it's chronic symptoms or a strange sensation in your body, whether the situation is an emotional one, a physical one, or a mental one. Catastrophizing cranks our systems up. It tells our brain and our nervous system that there is a major problem, a catastrophe, and our body, as it was built to do, responds in some way or another to a threat that isn't as dangerous as we are communicating to our brains. Catastrophizing is seen as irrational thoughts and believing that things are worse than they are. But Tracie, you interject again, we are living a real life catastrophe. We're in a pandemic that is claiming the lives of 1 in every 1,000 people. I'm not overreacting. And again, doing what's recommended by the CDC is not the problem. It's what we're telling ourselves during a crisis that makes the crisis worse for us. The more we focus on it, the stronger the signals to your brain that there is an emergency. And your nervous system would begin to more and more permanently stay in a heightened state of fight or flight mode. So over the past year, I've been making great leaps of my own to get out of this constant state of fight or flight. Reframing negative thoughts and big picture thinking are just two of the many skills I've learned to help with my personal struggles with anxiety, in and outside of the critical state of the world. Practicing deep breathing is also helpful. It's the only physical way you can calm down your system, allowing your parasympathetic nervous system to kick back out of stress mode. But catastrophizing is still one of my biggest challenges. For example, I stayed in Rochester, Minnesota for a month for the pain rehabilitation program last November. Obviously, I was there during the steep increase of COVID-19 cases. Mayo Clinic reduced the group sizes in the program, and we were instructed to wear a mask at all times. However, the group ate lunch together in a team room where masks were removed to eat. I've been a germaphobe all my life, even before the pandemic, but even so, I was shocked that people were encouraged to be in a room together and eat without masks on. I protected myself by eating my lunch in my car, but often I'd get back and there'd be a woman by the name of Sherry who had her mask off. In fact, periodically throughout the day, she'd take her mask off for no clear reasons and not put it back on for 20 minutes. The worst part, I was sitting the closest to her. One day, I had a headache and I was standing out in the hallway waiting for another group to finish up so I could get my car keys and go to lunch. As I was doing so, I overheard Sherry's assigned nurse tell another member, Sherry has COVID symptoms, so I sent her to the clinic. I panicked. Of course, it was the one who refused to keep her mask on that got COVID symptoms. So the team room opened, and sure enough, Sherry was missing. So I remember going to my car and calling my wife, who was on her lunch break back in Michigan. Already worried about the potential exposure, I listened to Vanessa fill me in on the fact that several of her coworkers were positive for COVID. While we were on the phone, she took her temperature, and it was 102. No, it was a faulty thermometer, and she did not actually end up having a fever, but I was thinking Vanessa had just visited me 2 days ago. So between Sherry's COVID symptoms, my thinking that Vanessa had a fever, and my own sudden headache, negative thoughts flooded my brain. I have COVID. I am going to be sick. I'm going to be very sick. I maybe infected others. I'm going to end up in ICU because my lungs aren't great. I have pre-existing conditions, and I'm about to die from COVID. I couldn't seem to stop the thoughts. But then I realized what I was doing. I was predicting the future. I was giving myself a diagnosis with absolutely no facts to back it up. I had a headache, which is a chronic symptom. I hadn't gotten a test. I hadn't even taken my temperature. I didn't even know for sure that Sherry had COVID-19. So I realized I was catastrophizing. And guess what? I went back to Mayo and got my temperature taken, no fever. Sherry was tested and it was negative. She had a sinus infection. Vanessa got tested just to be safe and was negative. I had 3 tests when I was there, all were negative. So I suffered because of these negative catastrophizing thoughts. So this is why neuroplasticity is so important now more than ever. We are all enduring things we have never faced before. It is uncertain and scary enough without adding a heavy load of stress and negative thoughts to our brains. We can reframe our thoughts and focus on meaningful activities that involve the use of that motor cortex. Have board game nights with your family, cook a meal from scratch, even if it's just once a month. Maintain a garden, even if it's just in milk jug containers. Handwrite letters to distant family and friends. Be mindful of your thoughts in every activity that you do. Spend time feeling gratitude for all of these great things you have in your life, because it doesn't feel like it when we are watching the deaths. Because although it doesn't feel like it when we are watching the death toll rise due to COVID-19, or it doesn't feel like it when we are going through any other crisis, they really are just a fraction of your life. And lastly, think of your brain as a giant, smooth sand dune. When we first carve out a path on an untouched dune, it's hard. Once the path is complete, it's fairly shallow and consists of just one set of footprints. But as we keep walking the same path, we engage in the same thoughts and behaviors, we pave it deeper and deeper. So when we repeat behavior, we strengthen these pathways in our brains. Our brains will change as we respond differently to symptoms, events, and thoughts. In time, we will feel more empowered in the face of crisis and more resilient to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracie. That was splendid.